Project that I've been working on or that my team has been working on, is called Oaken Cabinet. So there exists a federal government, believe it or not, and a cabinet within it. And a cabinet is basically the executive branch of the federal government. And the way in which an executive takes an action, or the executive branch takes actions in Canada, is through a thing called an order in council. And lo and behold, we live in a democracy. The orders and councils are public. They're available to the public through this website right here. It's not strictly the most accessible thing, given that you have to start by knowing a little bit about orders and council to begin with. There's no way to explore the data in kind of an intuitive, rudimentary way. And there's no easy way to do a systemic analysis of all these different orders that pop up within this data set. And it's not open. None of the data in here is open at all. The front end is basically all that the feds provide. So we got interested in this website because during the election, some journalists took a serious look at this database. They effectively went through record by record to see whether or not it's a complete database. And they discovered that it isn't complete. There's missing orders. You can tell because they're sequentially numbered. If you look far over there, right above the ACT column, there's a PC number, and those are sequential. And there were gaps in that. So the follow-up question is, why is there a gap? Is this just administrative oversight? Is this the government doing things in secret? And the answer was both. They fixed all the administrative oversights. They got in touch with the federal public servants. They fixed that, which was good. But there were still missing ones, and there were secret orders in council, which are permissible and completely acceptable under Canadian law. They probably, there's a couple of enumerated categories like national defense and things like that. But the government never disclosed the fact that they did things in secret. You can still say, hey, we did this thing, but we're not disclosing it because of national defense. And what that said to me and to the team was, why is this story coming out now if these secrets go back 15 years? Because there's around 15 years worth of orders in council in this database. And the answer is basically because nobody can do a systemic, take a systemic look at what's going on this website. So our solution, which we've been working on during the sprint, was to basically download all of these records and then republish them in an open format on a website called oakencabinet.ca. Where we are in the process right now is that we have a working scraper which downloads all these records. We've built a front end for a new database so then people can more readily browse these things. We've also got a continuously updated, basically download the whole thing portion to that website. We've built an alert system so you can subscribe to certain keywords that may interest you. If you're, for instance, an advocacy organization or a journalist, let's say the word immigration, because a lot of immigration rules, or Syria, if you're interested in that stuff. So then our website will proactively alert you once this government source is updated on topics of interest to you. And that's basically it at this point. We are currently in the phase of getting it on the live web, so deploying it there. We could use some help on that, as well as coming up with a launch strategy. So we've been in touch with a nonprofit kind of legal advice clinic that deals with internet and tech stuff called Civic. We've been in touch with a couple of other people that have launched similar projects in the country for their advice, such as the people that built Open Parliament, if you're familiar with that. And just getting all that feedback to make sure that once we go live with this, it's done in a responsible, prudent way. What's my time like?
You got less than a minute.
Less than a minute?
Yeah.
So given that, I think that's kind of the big takeaway. I would say that launch time now that we're getting close to holidays is difficult. But we are definitely on the brink of launch at this point. So I will open the field to questions. Gabe?
What are your objectives or hopes with your launch strategy?
So the objectives are in hopes. They were originally under the prior government to make sure that they don't change this database, to make sure that we can't do what we wanted to do. Under the new government and the sunny ways of the new government, that's less of a concern. But the hopes is basically to get some attention to these orders. Because these are serious, significant policy and legal decisions that are being made by the cabinet that are not normally scrutinized by the media and by the public at large. And that's the end of my time.
There's your
If you're
dog.
interested, we can talk after when we break into project groups.
Nice.
I want the whole thing. No, you can push your button.
Oh, is it my turn?
I think.
Yeah, if you're ready. Thanks.
Thank you.
It's like it hard. There we go. So, this next talk is about the Toronto Budget Project. I just produced a slide deck for a more formal presentation, so I just robbed some slides. I didn't mean to be overly formal about this, but so the purpose of the project, as it says there, is to support and inform public debate about the Toronto budget. The Toronto budget, as you probably know, is about $11.5 billion. It's very complicated. Most of the councillors make decisions, but there are intervention points or decision points where the public can have their say. Widely accepted that it's very obtuse and very difficult to work with and very difficult to get at, very difficult to influence. So essentially we want to make the whole thing more accessible. So obviously it's an ambitious project, and a big part of it is trying to zero in on a few little things that we can do to hopefully make a difference. So we've been talking since July at weekly meetings, and we had this workshop in November that Emily had a lot to do with and Howard of presenting. It was really good. A number of consistent messages came at us about the budget. People want to have clarity. Right at the moment, it's difficult to make sense of it. There's too much of it. It's all over the place. The terminology is messed up. Give us clarity, including consistent terminology and visualization. So that's a very clear direction that can be translated into design. Provide full context. So, for example, not only source documents, support documents, related information, but also related processes is generally accepted that by the time deputations happen for the budget overall, which is sort of mid-January in 3 or 4 sessions, most of the decisions have been made. People are very aware that there's all kinds of stuff that goes on behind the scenes and before that, various documents and so forth. So they want full context. They want the meat of the matter. They really want to make a difference here. People want collaboration. And so there was an idea for a deputation process that allows people to discover others who are making similar deputations, for example, so that people can work together. And ultimately, people actually want to influence this budget process to improve the public good. So those are actually, I think, pretty concrete things. So out of all that process, here are sort of goals and strategy. Create small exemplary web portal applications. So in other words, we're trying to develop little things that make a big difference, mostly thinking, mostly design sorts of things. Both budget and both the process and the content are difficult for people, and they want both addressed, and fundamentally people want to assemble arguments so that they can make a difference. So on a practical basis, start small, keep going. We haven't started yet, we're about to, it's very exciting. Always minimal viable products, focus on exceptional design, and that's the critical thing. Try to come up with design issues and solve those to demonstrate, but anticipate future development because it is a large area. We've worked a lot on making connections and thinking of this whole project as being in the context of input. So we've got our own work group, which is our builders in the middle, but we're also very keen on getting ongoing feedback. There's an organization called Better Budget, which is fantastic. Betterbudget.ca, by all means, go and see them. We've had a lot of help from them already, also with the workshop, but essentially to help us with ongoing input and feedback. We've also made contact, and Emily and others already have contacts within the city, and they seem very open to this project and seem very open to working with us. So we want to make this a collaborative, constructive project. I, for one, am not interested in gotcha moments and things. We actually want to help as things go on. So here's my somewhat provocative notional mock-up, I call it. There are an infinite number of possibilities in terms of where to go, but what I've created here is just what's supposed to be a starter screen on a mobile device, which implies mobile first, for one thing, but a budget roadmap, which comes from an idea that came from New York. What's my time?
35 seconds.
No kidding.
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
So budget roadmap is what are the intervention points? Deputation helper is how do you actually get to these committees and make your points? And then the big one, explore the budget, which is visualization tools to actually make it make sense. We had this big, we had a process in the summer fall that went on for 10 weeks. We had this planning meeting or workshop, which was really good. And come and help. Wait for the song.
Wow.
Thank you.
Nice desktop.
Yeah, this is not my presentation. The project that I worked on during the November sprint was a scraper for planning applications. So really basic idea, and that actually has a lot in common in approach with what Alex did with the Orders in Council, where so planning up. I'm not an urban planner. I don't really know this stuff that well. What I do know is that every time there's a new big building going up, like a condo or whatever, the city puts up this big white sign that says there's going to be a big building here, and it has some like various random details like the number of parking spots, and then at the bottom there's a space that says like information about a public meeting will be posted here someday. And that if you actually want to participate in that public meeting, you just have to like walk by that sign pretty often in order to wait for that information to be posted. And overall, that just seemed like a kind of a wonky system. The city actually has information about each of those. Each one of those signs represents a development application, and there's information about all these development applications on the city website. This is the interface for it. And you can kind of get a sense. There's these really awesome retro pins, and then you can click to learn more. And various projects have like more or less information, but it's kind of it's like kind of it's certainly there, but it's like similarly wonky to the interface that Alex showed us. So we decided the few of us who worked on this project, none of us were actually urban planners. We don't actually understand a lot of detail about this data, but one of the ways that we like looking at data is like having all of it in front of us, and there's not even really that much data here. So we decided to write a scraper that would go through the city website and just like pull all the data down so that we could put it in a database that made it much easier to work with, so that we could look at it, so that we could run queries, so that we can sort it and do the stuff that the city website doesn't allow us to do. And so over the course of 4 weeks, we did that. Primarily a developer named Josh, who's not here tonight, who we met through Lighthouse Labs, and he wrote this code. We had a couple of we tried out a few things initially, and then eventually landed on this fairly straightforward couple of Python scripts, one of which goes through and scrapes and downloads all the data, which is in a sort of like wonky Java-ish sort of format. And then another script which goes through and reads all those files and then imports it into a MySQL database. And so this is the code. It's up on GitHub. It's functioning. It runs every night as a cron job on a server so that we're able to get nightly updates. The data doesn't really change that often, but it gives us the ability to see it every 24 hours. And then this is what it looks like when we pulled it into the MySQL database. So this is the thing. This is the thing on my server, and it updates every evening. And this is quite long, but what's interesting is that all the data that's on the city website is there, but there's actually a whole bunch of fields here that are not always visible through the city website, or so it seems to us. We haven't analyzed this fully, and probably our next step should be to sit down with an urban planner who actually understands this data, and there are a number of them in the room tonight, so maybe we can do that later on, to actually understand like what do all these things mean, and what interesting insights can we learn from exploring this data. Time check?
1 minute.
This is exactly the scope of what we had intended to complete for our November sprint. Sorry if it's disappointing. There's no UI. It's just a scraper. But just a scraper is a starting point for us to actually build apps to explore the data in a like more agile kind of way, and then actually to build apps on top of. So right now, there's a script that allows you to get a dump of this whole MySQL database as a CSV, and you can open it in Excel, for example, or parse it into anything else. But we might build a mini API to allow you to run queries on this if you were to build an app to allow people to explore planning applications, or if there was something particular you were looking for. Along the way, we were told about an app that was built by the Code for Australia folks, which is called Planning Notifier or something, and that does much the same functionality as what Alex described, but for planning data, and they're actually pulling it now for a bunch of different cities all across Australia, so that when a new planning application goes in and it matches a certain criteria, you get an email.
Yay. What happens to
All right, so I'm going for the plain language project. We are less far along than some of the other folks. We're closer to the problem identification phase. So I just kind of want to start off with a question. How many of you have been in a situation where you've been working somewhere and you've kind of been asked to do something by your employer that you're not sure was like legal, or where there was maybe something unethical going on? Like, just a show of hands, how many people have been in a situation where you've been kind of a bit sketched out and you weren't sure if something was right? Okay, so a good number of you, and keep in mind this is a fairly this is a professional. A lot of you are working, a lot of you are quite well educated and all of that, so you'd be quite well informed from the get-go. So if you were looking to find out, hey, are they following the rules or not, you would have to look at the provincial legislation and the provincial guide to the Employment Standards Act, which governs employment in Ontario. And I will tell you right now, the guide to the Employment Standards Act, if you wanted to know, hey, am I working the right number of hours in a week, you have to go through a guide that looks like this. It is very complicated. There is a lot of logic. It's a wall of text. It's impossible to understand, basically. So if you're someone for whom English is a second language, or you're not, you're a newcomer, you're not very familiar with where to look for this information, this is really not all that helpful. You're not going to find out what your rights are under the legislation, and that basically means that the intent of the legislation breaks down at the very last step of it, because this is incomprehensible. There are similar examples. If we were inspired by a project in Boston, which looked at the process for registering kids for public schools in Boston, and you have to go through a dense wall of text, and I'm losing my connection again, a dense wall of text to understand how to apply for school in Boston. Same thing applies to a lot of really vital and important government processes. The process for applying for food stamps in California, you have to have it open on my window. You have to go through a ridiculously complex form to get food stamps in California. So our goal is to look at instances where there are particularly problematic processes. Either it's an application process, or it's something informational like the employment rights, and understanding your employment rights. Things where the information barrier is such that the original intent of the thing gets lost, and the people who need to access vital services or need to know their rights end up not being able to do so. So we've, through the month of November, we've only had 3 hack nights to work on this so far. We've identified a number of sort of key research questions that will guide our kind of problem identification. Where can we make the most impact? We've been researching organizations that provide services where this kind of thing might be a problem. We've done a bunch of essentially research work, and our kind of thinking around this is that we really want to spend a lot of time on the problem identification, understanding where the problems could be, and the people who are working on this already, and then eventually get to kind of a technology phase and be able to design a tech product that may address either in a systemic way a number of these issues, or may like the Boston Public Schools example, may focus in on one particular specific situation. So yeah, is there any questions about that? I know it's a very quick run through. Yes.
Would something like Stack Overflow be something where you crowdsource kind of solutions to get food stamps? What forms do I have to fill out? And then there'd be a there'd be a Stack Overflow question. Those who aren't familiar with Stack Overflow, it's just a place where you can ask tech questions, and the tech community comes in and says, "Oh, you do this and that." So basically, it would just be like a And you see this
Yeah.
happening a lot in Reddit Toronto, where they're like, "Hey, my employer asked me to do this. Is this cool?" And then those people on Reddit respond.
So that's one potential direction. It would be very high, high effort and potentially high impact. The city of, I believe it was Oakland. There was a city in the States that produced something like that. It was like Oakland Q&A, and you could essentially ask questions of the city about like city processes, and citizens would crowdsource answers. Really, we're kind of far away from being able to do something like that, and it's a very big tech question. And then how do you build a community on a platform like that? So we're kind of, I don't know if I'm answering the question, if that counts. It does count. I'm getting a nod. No? Okay. For us, it may be something like a pressure campaign. We mount a pressure campaign and name and shame the, worst written government websites out there. It may be that we provide like alternate access to some of this information and provide a better, human readable copy of the information. There are a number of people who are working in this space already, especially in the legal space, around community legal education, and we would be looking to build on the work that those organizations are doing and to build something that really, at the end of the day, has impact for the people who would use it.
Thank you, Matthew. The only one to get applause.
Oh, everybody got
Behavioral. Oh, did we?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, clock. This is an idea that was kind of a couple of years now, going from gestation to actual near prototype product. It was an idea that was originally kind of inspired by the idea of urban informatics, which are things that would display environmental data in space. Things like could be water quality, could be air quality, could be many other things, but we know that increasingly things in our environment are broadcasting information about themselves, and there could be ways to represent that data. And one of the things that we're pretty keen on thinking about displaying would be transit info, and we know that that is out there in the world already. TTC in Toronto is broadcasting through its NextBus API real-time information about where streetcars and buses and subways are. And so we knew that the data is there and that there's a value in broadcasting that data. And probably lots of you may have an app on your phone or you use it, if nothing else, the screens that are in the subway stations. So we're already using this data in a practical, functional way. But our kind of hypothesis was that a lot of the displays that are out there right now that are displaying transit information are either ugly or complicated or distracting, in the sense that like an ugly one, if you might be covered in tons of ads. So if you sit on the subway platform, there's tons of ads telling you to buy stuff, and the little information about like when the thing is actually coming is this tiny little box. So they could be super cluttered. And they're also, and they can be kind of complicated. If you're using an app, you have to kind of scroll around, find your route, then find which direction, then figure out which stop you're at, and it can be a bit of a pain in the ass. Even those of us who are kind of tech savvy, it's not as fast as you'd like it to be. And they're also distracting environmentally. Like if I'm sitting here talking to Mark and I know I have to leave for a meeting in 15 minutes or something like that, if I have to check a phone, then I pull out my phone and suddenly I see I got a text message and I'm like, oh, I got better respond to that. And while I'm doing that, then I get an email and it's like, I just wanted to know when the next streetcar is coming. And meanwhile, I'm ignoring my friend who's sitting here, so that kind of blows. So we were thinking, wouldn't it be cool if we could kind of develop something that kind of solved some of those problems? So what we came up with was this idea of a clock, like a physical clock that was guided by a couple of philosophical constraints. One, which was it would have no screen, so no screen would be allowed, and it would be the kind of thing that would help you stay in your environment rather than take you out of it. And we were also hoping it could be something kind of beautiful and quirky and interesting. So we, me, Mark, and I, and Larry, who is not here right now, and Gabe at Parts, and another guy named Etienne in Alberta, have for varying periods of time over the last couple of years been playing around with what we could do to do that, and we've kind of landed on a few ideas in terms of having something like a circular clock face that would have 5 hands, and those 5 hands would show you in real time where the next 5 transit vehicles are. So if you're at college and university waiting for the college car, and you would, as Mark is showing you now, calibrated the stop to say, I'm at this stop and I want to know westbound when the next 5 cars are coming, you would see those 5 hands moving in real time for the next 5 streetcars that are coming westbound on college. And the cool thing about that is it could also start to tell you some stories about what's going on. So if you were being burned by an infamous streetcar bunching scenario, you would see 4 hands right on top of each other moving in lockstep, and then maybe a 5th one way, way back. So if I'm sitting here with Mark and I know I gotta leave in 15 minutes, but the next 4 cars are all right on top of each other, I gotta go now, because the next one is way, way, way back. So, so we've been playing around with that, and all I have really brought to this is ideas and enthusiasm, and Mark and Larry and Gabe and our friend Etienne have also been real kind of experts on like actually making it happen. There's always like a person with ideas and no technical follow through necessarily. So Mark can explain hopefully quickly kind of what he's done from a technical perspective.
Yeah, I got it working.
Yeah.
So what this is reading is a sensor. So we had to build an optical encoder to get these motors to work. So the last year we've been trying to figure out how to accurately represent independent clock hands. So it's mostly been mechanical engineering. But if you look really carefully, I can't scroll up unfortunately. You can see that there is data. Okay. There. Where did we go? So this is one streetcar. So it'll tell you its ETA in seconds, and then that's relative to the number of ticks on this wheel, where to move the wheel. So we finally figured out how to take the data, which it's grabbing right now, and then telling a wheel where to move. So now we need to make 5 wheels, and then put them into a casing, and then put them on a very pretty, or put them behind a very pretty face. And so yeah, this was a big step in the right direction. We did this in the last month. So, yeah.